because it's Amazon, Google, Microsoft, it's much like there's a brand associated. Does that mean if the companies are sketchy or it's not like well known, there's a little bit more digging going on at that point of time? It's like, I've never heard of this company. I know this is also a common question. How did you find your job? How do you respond to that?
I mean, be honest if you're fully remote, but also expect the question of why you have to be an H-1B if you're fully remote, just because that might throw out some red flags if you're not prepared to answer that question. For your dependents, their approval hinges on your approval. So you need to get your stamp before they do. Otherwise, they're going to be put into 221G. So if you went from a very well-known company to a lesser known company, that might be a little bit odd for the consular officers.
What are the common reasons for rejection?
I have seen OPT ineligibilities where you misrepresented yourself by giving us a fake like OPT letter that you worked for a company that you never worked for, and then it was considered misrepresentation. I've seen those.
Before we dive into all the strategies and stories that we're going to discuss in this podcast, let me ask you this. Do you have a clear job hunting strategy to get an internship or a full-time job? Most people don't, and it's costing them opportunities. I've helped over 1,100 students with their strategies through my ultimate job hunting course.
And trust me, I'm not even kidding. I could see so many recruiters viewing my profile.
And it's been the best investment I've ever made.
The content is incredibly practical, filled with tips and strategies that make you stand out to recruiters.
It was one of the best courses that I have done till date.
This course covers everything that you need to stand out. You will get ultimate resume course, you will get ultimate LinkedIn course, networking strategy, access to 1,100 plus job seekers for support, and personal support from me through WhatsApp group. I will walk you through every single step that you need with real examples and the tools that will give you an edge. I don't want you to miss any other opportunity to land your next job or an internship. So check the link in the description. And now I will let you enjoy the podcast. Thank you, Yvette, for doing this. I am excited. This is like a different territory we are entering, but also something you told me that you were also educating H-1B visas. So before we get into like what are the common questions and all of that, let's do the quick intro for people who might have not watched our videos. Like, who are you and what have you done and what do you do now?
Great. Thanks for having me again, Udeti. So my name is Yvette Bansal. I'm a former U.S. consular officer. I served in India for 5 years, and I was the H&L lead, the portfolio lead there. So I was a little bit of a mini expert on H-1Bs and Ls, and India is the largest holder and issuer of H-1B and L visas. So that makes me a little bit of an expert. So you guys are in luck today. There's a lot of people on the internet kind of saying a lot of things about H-1Bs and Ls, but I have seen thousands of them. And yeah, I'm happy to share some of that information here today.
Amazing. And also like you have lead as in like you also interviewed people on H-1B visas when they go for interviews and L1 visas. Correct?
Yeah, so as an H-1B lead, I adjudicated H-1Bs and Ls, and if there was other officers that were new, I would train them. I would tell them how to adjudicate an H-1B or an L, what to look for. If other officers had questions on the window, they generally would go to the lead. I had local staff members who I reviewed H-1B 221Gs or helped them when they had questions. So my world, like every consular officer has like an extra portfolio, and that was my portfolio, and I really loved that visa classification.
Amazing. I know we are going to do multiple videos, and I'll bring you back to like do more of that story. Today, I know we're going to focus on just the what are the typical H-1B questions, and I have few of them. I've gone through that whole process myself, so I'll ask you those, and then some reasons why people get rejected. Also, I just also want to throw out, because many people have been asking, UDJ is the code if people wants to consult with you one-on-one. I'll put a link in the description, and we have F1 visa course as well, so people can go check out that too. So my visa gets approved on October 1st if I'm doing change of status. Now I'm in United States. I'm booking my flights. I am going to India because I'm like, I want that stamp. So I'm booking my visa appointment. I am in front of my window. An officer is there. What are like some of the, like, what is the typical mindset of visa officer at that point? Like, what are they trying to judge before we get into the questions? Like, what exactly are they trying to judge at this point? Because it's a different visa type for H-1B.
Okay, before I answer that, I want to let people know because I didn't introduce my company. So I started a company called Udeti because I came to the US when I was 9 years old, so I'm an immigrant myself. And I thought that the visa process was it needed more transparency, and I wanted to give people out there some guidance. So I started this company that has other ex-visa officers to do visa interview preparation specifically. So that's our niche. And so UDJ was mentioning that with his coupon code UDJ, you can get 20% off. 20% off is for like a limited time. Because if you see this video
Like 1 year later,
in 6 months, maybe it'll be 10% off or 15% off. But as of right now, it's 20% off. So definitely take advantage of it if you want to do visa prep with me or another ex-visa officer. So I just wanted to mention that. So back to Yudi's story. And also from 6 years ago, he had a video that I was watching earlier today where he was talking about
you didn't tell me you were doing that.
Yeah, I know. I didn't mention that until right now. So we're going to link that video from 6 years ago where his videos were not as like crazy as they are now with like all these random people popping up. Like make sure the editor pops someone up right now. So he was just outside, like there was like trees behind him, and he was like, "This is my H-1B visa interview experience." And it was really cute. And it's a good video, so you guys can check that out. Yeah. So now you are getting your visa stamping, and so what was the question? What's going on?
Right, yeah. What is going on in the mind of visa officer? What are they trying to judge at this point of time?
Right. So I get pretty excited when I see an H-1B because 9 out of 10 times it should be good to go. You should be good to go. I can't 214B. I cannot just say no like a B visa or an F visa or a J visa. And so most of the time H-1Bs are prepared. I'm ready to ask them questions about how they got their job and what school they went to. And especially if I see that this individual has went to school in the United States, that's even better. So the mindset of the consular officer at this point is, cool, let me make sure I cross my T's and dot my I's, and hopefully this H-1B is good to go and I can issue this visa.
Got it. Okay. So I think I'm going to list down few questions that were asked to me, and then these are the common questions, and let me know if these are the question you also asked or are there more. I think the first one is like, who's your petitioner? It's an interesting question because like, do I have to say my company or is the lawyer who's petitioning me? But how do you answer that question?
Right. So on your I-797, it clearly says who your petitioner is. And so as a consular officer, if your petitioner is someone like Amazon, Microsoft, Verizon, Deloitte, Tata, I'm happy. Like this is a great petitioner. They have a lot of legitimacy. They're being, traded on the stock market. I'm now going to just make sure everything about this person's profile is lining up, and I'm feeling pretty good. So who's your petitioner? Obviously, who's your employer? Who's actually filing this petition? So that might be different, right? Like than an end client, which we'll maybe talk about in a little bit, but yes.
Yeah. Hey, before we move on to the next part of the video, I want to quickly talk about our newsletter community, which you can be part of absolutely free. We are now going strong and we have more than 40,000 people in our newsletter community. So imagine 40,000 people are receiving my newsletter every single week, twice a week, where I break down all of the stories that we did and make it a valuable resource for you. So if you're someone who doesn't have time to watch this and you just want to get an email with all of the resources into an email, that is the place to be. I'll put the link in the description. I'll give you some example. This is the one for Tanvi where how she got 2 co-ops and she paid off her entire master's fees. This is an example of Maya, where she got 3 co-ops and she paid off her fees plus a little bit of savings. Here is an example of Sahil, who got his green card in 3 years. Here is an example where we shared a bunch of resources on job hunting. So I promise this is going to be valuable resource for you, and it doesn't cost you anything. If you want to be part of our newsletter community, link will be in the description, or you can go to link.udj.com/newsletter. This is the URL. And now I'll let you enjoy the video. And you mentioned that because it's Amazon, Google, Microsoft, it's much like there is a brand associated. Does that mean if the companies are sketchy or it's not like well known, there's a little bit more digging going on at that point of time? It's like, I've never heard of this company.
Yeah, there's a little bit more scrutiny for companies that are not as well known, because if you see a petitioner like Amazon, you make assumptions about the quality of the applicant, but also you know that they have a physical location. And that is a big part of making sure that there is a job for this person to go to. So when you see those big companies, you're kind of settled, like this person's probably going to be paid pretty well. Their education is probably good, and so there's just these things that make it a solid case.
We'll get to the companies where you do feel like, okay, I've never heard of it, and what you're gonna like future scrutiny questions. But then the question, like, what if I'm working? Again, you mentioned Deloitte, but if my company is like a contracting company and I'm like working for a client who is probably Amazon or Oracle or something like that, and if so, do you guys ask like who's your client, and if that, like, are you allowed to say who the client is?
Right. So we try to determine for H-1Bs immediately whether that individual is going to an end client or they are going to be working at that company as like a project manager or building a product. I think you were doing a product in-house. So if your petitioner is Amazon, you're going to work for Amazon in the United States, there is no end client, it's all pretty straightforward. If it's an unknown company and your end client is Walgreens, I still will scrutinize that application more so because the petitioner is not known. And so the status of them actually going to Walgreens is a little bit blurry. So I want to make sure they're actually going to that end client.
Got it. Okay.
Mhm.
And so how do you scrutinize that? Like, how do you scrutinize that this end client is not well known? Like, what's the process? Like, is it just more questions?
Yeah, so in this case, the end client is well known, but there is also situations where the petitioner is not known and the end client is also not known. And there's also situations where there's like all these middle vendors in the middle, so it can
Yeah,
get
basic
kind of
consultancy,
dicey.
we call it.
Yeah, so I ask them where they're going to be working. I ask them where, how, if they've worked with this end client before. So they could be like, I've worked with Walgreens already. They've been my end client. This is where I work. This is what I do. So if they've already been working with that end client, that is like a positive. If they've never worked with that end client before, then I start asking a little bit more questions to determine does this job really exist? So can I see your end client letter? What's your job role? And take it from there.
Okay, we'll get to the documents part in a minute, but the another question that was asked to me was like, what do you do, or like what are your duties, what are your responsibilities? How do you respond to that? Like, does it have to match what I've said it in DS-116 in my application?
Right. So we want to see that everything is lining up. So make sure you're filling out your own DS-160. Your education is lining up with the job that you're getting and also with the job duties on that end client letter or that offer letter from the petitioner themselves. And so it all has to line up. It all has to make sense. And here the consular officer could also be listening for how articulate you are about your own job duties. Like you should know exactly what you're going to be doing. And again, if you already are doing this job, you left just to get that visa stamping, then it should be pretty straightforward how you're answering those questions.
Okay. I know this is also a common question. How did you find your job? One, is this a common question? Do people ask, like, do visa officers ask this? And then two, how do you respond to that?
Right. So how you found your job, it could be a couple of different flavors of answers. One is I was on OPT or I was on CPT or OPT and they decided to hire me. I love hearing that. That makes so much sense. Or I was on OPT with a different company and I decided to apply for this one. Also makes a lot of sense. The third one, you're going to get a little bit more scrutiny. I applied on LinkedIn. Some recruiter reached out to me. So now if you have an unknown company, unknown petitioner, and some recruiter reached out to you, I want to know if you really have a job. This company is sponsoring you to go all the way to the United States. Seems a little dicey. Does it happen? Obviously, it happens. But here is where my scrutiny and my questions and maybe 221G to make sure that everything is good.
What is 221G for people who don't know?
Right. So it's when the consular officer puts you into administrative processing to make sure that everything about your application, if they want to review it, they don't have a lot of time at the window. So if they want to review it further, you told them you found this job on LinkedIn. The end client and the petitioner are not very well known to the consular officer. They might ask you to submit your resume. They might ask you to submit the offer letter. They may ask you to submit the end client or the product. They might ask you to submit things about the companies themselves, like their revenue or the list of employees. It can get pretty extensive.
Got it. Okay. Another common question: how long have you been working in the company, or for the end client? Like, how do you respond? Like, what are you trying to know, and then how do you respond to that?
Right. So if you've already been working for that company, maybe then I'll say, okay, great. Where's your W-2? I see your W-2. You told me you're working for a year. This is your salary. Your W-2 checks out. Great. If you've never worked for that company, then I'm just, again, trying to establish how you got this job, why you were hired. So versus somebody else.
Got it. Okay. What about the scenario where student just graduated in May and or December, and the company has filed the H-1B in March? They haven't yet completed the entire year, so there's no W-2 because they got it in October and they went in November to get the stamp. What happens in that case? Like, they don't have W-2. Is it just they say like, oh, I just graduated in May and I got the visa, like my company applied for it, and I don't have W-2. It's a salary.
Exactly. And yeah, exactly. They can offer the pay stub, the offer letter, some other information because the year is not up. Consular officer, that's a good answer. Just explain.
Okay. And back to, how did you find your job? So I found my job through career fair. Is that or a conference? People usually go to conferences or career fair. So if I say I went to this career fair, I met a recruiter there, and like, that's how we got connected, and they offered me an interview. And then, is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. Just have the details, if especially that if you found it on LinkedIn, just be prepared to discuss the details. Just gauge the consular officer on how much they want to know. It could be that they want to know that you had 5 rounds of interviews, what type of interviews you had. That's getting a little bit more extensive. But if you're somebody who I would say is coming from India or another country into the US for a very first time, it's a very fresh H-1B, then it's not unusual for those questions to be asked.
Got it.
Less so for people who are been working for that company for some time.
Got it. Okay. If it's a product-based company, then do you typically ask, like, what is the product you are working on, and if so, like, what are you trying to understand from that?
I always ask what the product is. I'm trying to understand, can you actually explain your product? Do you know what you're doing? So I'm just gauging your credibility. So make sure that you answer concisely and clearly. don't try to dumb it down too much for the consular officer. You're like, I don't even know what a good example of dumbing it down is, but you don't have to get very technical and verbose, but be concise about what your product is. The consular officer will, follow. If it's a little technical, it makes you sound more credible, more legitimate. And we want to know, is it something big? Because if it's something big, when we ask you, so where is your work location, and it doesn't match up, then you may have some explaining to do. Like, okay, maybe I work on one component of the project. So just make sure that all these things are being assessed, and don't get like nervous if the consular officer kind of throws something at left field.
Okay. Again, going into one specific example, my company was a startup, which was a product-based company, got bought out by this giant corporation, which has 30,000 employees. And if they're asking me, the company, like they have multiple things, but I specifically work on product. So I still focus on product, not the what company is doing. Correct?
Well, if they specifically ask you about the product, then answer that question. But you may want to give an overview of what the company is. This is a company, 500 people. This is what they do. Within that company, I work on this product.
Got it. Okay, cool. One of the most common question I think usually get asked is, what is the location? What is your office location? And if the headquarter is different than the location that you're working on, or if it's a remote, like how do you answer all of these questions?
Right. So be honest, and you're going to have documentations in your LCA. Things are going to be spelled out in terms of where you're supposed to be working. So make sure that you're honest, make sure that you're accurately describing what your work location is, maybe how many people are in that same building. If it's different than headquarters, be prepared to answer questions about that. If it is headquarters and it's a big building, then make sure you say, hey, it's headquarters, there's lots of offices, or we work in this location. So just answer honestly about your work location. Just be honest.
And if it's a remote job, if the office is in Mountain View and I am working from Chico, which is like a 3 hours drive, I'm not going to the office, but I'm like, my boss and my company is okay with me being remote.
So in that case, be honest if you're fully remote, but also expect the question of why you have to be an H-1B if you're fully remote. So just because that might throw out some red flags if you're not prepared to answer that question. And it could be like, I need to be on this time zone, or I might have to do site visits. So just be prepared for that follow-up question.
Interesting. Okay. What again, I think another common question is like, what is your salary? What if I've gotten a promotion when I'm going to an interview? So anyway, what is your salary? And then if my salary has changed by $15,000-$20,000 more.
Yeah, I would mention your most recent salary and have an updated like promotion letter or offer letter. Here, the consular officer just wants to make sure that you are getting paid what the company says that you should be getting paid. I don't think that wage has really been an issue in India. Most people meet those wage requirements that have been set. So it's just kind of a checkbox of how much are you getting paid. Also, the consular officer wants to know that, like, if you're a product manager, you're not getting paid like $60,000. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. So it's another data point on the overall picture of this individual.
Okay. And then what's the highest level of education? I think this is another common question.
Right. So here they just want to make sure, you're going for specialized experience, you have a bachelor's degree, most H-1Bs have a master's degree. So here they're just getting a sense of what degree you have and how that lines up with your job. And it also can trigger other questions about if you have like some sort of specialized knowledge in a certain field. We won't go too down into that, but the consular officer is checking your degree. And so just be honest, just tell them, have your transcripts or other documents, and probably won't be looked at, but
Okay. Another most, I think in this is a fear also, maybe myth, dependence. If I have my wife or kids and they are planning to come back with me, what are the questions I should expect?
So for your dependents, their approval hinges on your approval.
Hmm.
So you need to get your stamp before they do. Otherwise, they're going to be put into 21G. And I've seen H4s come before their spouse, and that just causes unnecessary delays. So the only thing to expect there is, when did you get married? Maybe tell me how you met your spouse. Where was your child born? Do you have your birth certificate for your child? Do you have your marriage certificate? Do you have wedding pictures? So to be prepared, have all those things and just expect those questions. Don't be taken aback when they ask you, what was the first date that you had with your wife? Like, that could be a question.
Nice. Okay. I'm trying to think of when I did have, but it's long back. I remember February 9th. I remember. So, but do they have that information that I have already filed H4 for my wife or like my kids?
Hmm. Yeah, it should show up as a family in the system.
Okay. What are some of the less common questions which officers do ask and people are like surprised sometimes? Like, okay, I did not expect that question.
Mm, yeah. How many employees does your company have?
Mm.
How many offices does your company have around the world?
Oh wow. Like how
Um,
would I know that? Like I mean if I'm thinking of my company Excel, like I know it's 30, 26, 27,000 employees. Do I have to have the exact number?
I mean, they want to know if you know the size of your company. Um, Maybe how many offices. I mean, you should ask less common questions. These are less common questions. These are definitely less common.
But like if
Um,
I'm just thinking I was not asked this question, but if they asked me, I would have said at least that time it was 26, 27,000. But I wouldn't know the exact number. I would just say,
it's like, just being in the ballpark is good enough, but like if you're going for a company and you're off by thousands, or you just have no idea,
okay.
I
Interesting.
mean, you're getting sponsored for an H-1B. Like, the consular officer wants to make sure that, you didn't pay for your own petition, like, what's going on.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
Okay, got it. How many offices? That is also interesting. So,
Mm.
I mean, all over the world, like that could be like London, Australia, all of these companies. Oh, wow.
Less common question, right? Like, if you're not answering some of those common questions correctly, you're like, a recruiter reached out to me on LinkedIn. I've never been to the US before. Your English is weak. You
Mm,
can't talk about the job that you're doing. It's like, okay, so what do you know about your company? It's like, this is going, this may be more questions like, okay, like, convince me you know something about the company.
got it.
So
Got it.
that's where
Okay.
it could, yeah. Hmm.
What?
Or the
Yeah.
concert or the consular officer could be curious too. Like, if you're going to some startups in California and you're doing some cool stuff, like, the consular officer might be like really curious, like, what do you do there? Like, how
Mm.
did this company start? Um, why did they start this company? Do you know what the revenue of this company is? Do you know how much your product sells for? So it could also be like a mix of curiosity too, but at the same time, like, if the consular officer is curious and you all of a sudden clam up, that's probably the worst case scenario.
Got it. Okay. So know the company, the product and services they
Yeah,
offer. Okay, got it. Any other questions? These were interesting. Any other less
right.
common?
So if you went from a very well-known company to a lesser known company, that might be a little bit odd for the consular officer. So they may want to ask you why you made that transition or you went from a higher paying job to a lower paying job. So make sure that you're being honest. Like if they were working you at that higher paying job or that company and you're exhausted and this is a better opportunity, even though it's a lesser known company, talk passionately about that company, talk about the exciting things that you're doing, and convince the consular officer that this move makes sense, because you don't want to get stuck in giving them additional information because the consular officer is like not understanding what happened. And if you really have a job in the US, or you're just kind of like if this job actually exists, because the story might not make sense to them. So make sure that you are prepared for those questions.
Got it. Okay. What else? Like, is there any other that you can?
I think that's like a lot of gold nuggets for your viewers right now. Like maybe we'll do another video.
Yeah.
Ask
Yeah.
your questions below, or tell us about your H-1B visa experience below, and
Yeah.
tell us the weirdest question you
That
were
you
asked during your H-1B interview. I mean, I don't know if you're watching this, but maybe.
Yeah. That'll be amazing. Cool. So these are the questions, preparing, etc. What are the common reasons for rejection? Like, and I'm assuming you might have rejected some. What are some of the common reasons like you see people getting rejected for?
So for an H-1B, it's either like a revocation or a refusal based on an ineligibility, because you can't 214B. So an ineligibility is you did some crime, and there is a law that says that you're not eligible for this visa. So those could be common, like say in the past you misrepresented yourself in some way, and so you have a misrepresentation in eligibility, for example.
But do you guys have that information?
So this only happens if you misrepresented yourself to us or another like government entity, or you get arrested. And so if there's ineligibilities in the system,
Gotcha.
right, or you've done something that triggers an ineligibility, it
And
could.
yeah, I want to ask more specific question. This might be controversial, but like if there are people who worked illegally off campus, etc., can this be triggered somehow? Because now government figured out that this person went outside the country, and now do you guys have such information? Can this be a point of like, okay, this is why we
I
can?
have never seen that. That's not technically an ineligibility. And unless somebody reported that to us, I mean, working illegally off campus is different than overstaying on a visa. So if you've overstayed on a visa, that could trigger ineligibility depending on your level of overstay. But as long as nobody reports that you worked off campus, we don't really know, but people do report it. Like sometimes if your friend doesn't like you anymore, they'll call you, they'll message us, and that can affect you getting your F1 visa renewed. But I don't think it would necessarily affect your H-1B. I've seen ineligibilities, and I don't want to go too far into ineligibilities, but I have seen OPT ineligibilities where you misrepresented yourself by giving us a fake like OPT letter that you worked for a company that you never worked for, and then it was considered misrepresentation. I've seen those. So something like that, or
Got it.
something very egregious.
So that's like ineligibility is one of them. What are some
Ineligibility
of?
is one of them. And then the revocations based on something in the petition, you not having a job. So the most common is you not having a job. Like that company in the United States like doesn't really exist, isn't doing the product that it says it's doing, doesn't really have employees at the location it says it should. Any new information that USCIS doesn't have that is uncovered during the interview, you give me an end client letter that says that you're going to work for Walgreens. I'm thinking, based on the way you're answering your questions, you're not going to work for Walgreens. You don't know what your job is. So I hope that people really understand how important it is to be very articulate about like how you got your job and what your job role is. Like that's a very important thing to be able to communicate. So you're kind of describing something weird, and I decide to do an end client verification. I would first request that you submit your end client letter, then through back end processes, fraud would reach out to Walgreens, and Walgreens is like, you know what? UDJ, I've never heard of him, like he's not really coming to work here next month. Like so
Yeah.
then your visa gets revoked.
What
Your
about
petition gets revoked. Yeah.
yes? What about those cases where they are contracting companies and they don't have the project anymore?
Yeah. So exactly. So that could be something that we check. So that's another common reason. The project isn't there, the job isn't there, and client is not really expecting you. So
Got it. Okay.
those are the most common reasons. So that's, so make sure, right? Like make sure that when you're getting petitioned for an H-1B, you have a job and you're going for a credible company so that you don't have to worry about any of this.
Yeah, and you know what the job is and what the
Right.
product is and what the company does. Okay, got it. Because it's an H-1B visa, do you have to wear like blazer and jackets and all of it, or can you wear shorts?
You really can wear whatever you want. Just answer the questions in a way that the consular officer understands what you're doing in the United States and how you got your job. Like for H-1Bs, we can't 214B you because we don't like your t-shirt. It's a revocation process. So if I want to not give you your visa, I have to do some digging. I have to have some facts about the fact that you
Gotcha.
don't have. So it's a process. So it's not like the F1 or B visa where I'm like, this guy's weird. I'm gonna just say no. I don't like what he's wearing, so it gives me bad vibes. No, I don't want to be like extreme that way, but it's you should feel good about that with an H-1B.
Got it. Okay. Cool. Any final words of wisdom? I know we will do separate video on documents to bring and all of it, so people should subscribe to our channel. But any final words of wisdom, advice for H-1B?
Yeah, no, just reiterating the fact that make sure that the company that you work for is a credible company. If it has a lot of fraud in the past and you know it, that is something that the consular officer does have access to knowing. So you may be more at risk for administrative processing and a whole host of other things. So don't and uncovering fraud within the H-1B and L visa categories is becoming more sophisticated and will become more sophisticated. So if that company, for example, was, caught not having a product or not having people where they say that they should, and then they apply for your H-1B, that could definitely impact you. So just know that and just be cautious about who your petitioner is. This is just coming from my very narrow lens at the visa window. So I'm very much specialized in this one thing. And if you want to practice your H-1B or L interview and you want me to review your documents, definitely use that UDJ coupon. Don't forget to subscribe to the Udeti channel. We need to grow. And I hope that you found this useful. Yeah.
It was very useful. Yes. I'm excited. And I again can't wait to bring you back until our next one.
Keep smiling, keep hustling.
Yes, nice.